Ladies and gentlemen, patriots, and freedom-loving Americans from sea to shining sea, welcome back to the arena where we don't just read the headlines, we tear them apart to show you the ugly machinery grinding away beneath the surface. Today, we have to talk about something that should send a shiver down the spine of every single person who believes in the concept of a constitutional republic, because what we are witnessing right now is not politics as usual, nor is it the normal friction of a two-party system. What we are seeing, spelled out in black and white by Representative Jasmine Crockett and her cohorts in the radical wing of the Democratic Party, is the final, desperate phase of a slow-motion coup designed to strip you of your voice before you even step into a voting booth. We have reached a point in this country where the left has realized something terrifying for them but obvious to us, which is that they cannot win on the merits of their ideas, they cannot win on the strength of their economy, and they certainly cannot win on the safety of our borders. So, what is the alternative when you cannot convince the American people to vote for your disaster of an agenda? You make sure they don't have a choice at all. You take the leading candidate of the opposition party, the man who is polling ahead in every swing state that matters, and you simply erase him from the ballot. They call it protecting democracy, but let's be honest with each other, it is the exact opposite of democracy to tell millions of Americans that their vote is null and void because a handful of politicians and activist judges have decided they know better than the people. Representative Jasmine Crockett recently took to the airwaves to champion this new strategy, waving around a federal court ruling regarding the 14th Amendment like it was a holy writ, claiming that Donald Trump is disqualified from holding office. She talks about the rule of law with a straight face, while advocating for the weaponization of the legal system to take out a political opponent, a tactic that would make a banana republic dictator blush. The argument she is pushing relies on Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, a Civil War provision designed to stop Confederate officers, people who literally took up arms and wore gray uniforms to fight the Union, from infiltrating the government after the war. The Democrats are now trying to twist this specific historical tool into a universal bludgeon to smash the MAGA movement, equating a political protest on January 6 with the bloodiest war in our nation's history. Let's dig into the language Crockett is using, because words matter, and the way they are framing this is incredibly manipulative. She insists that the former president participated in an insurrection, a phrase that rolls off her tongue as if it were a proven fact, as if there were a jury verdict attached to it, but here is the reality check that the mainstream media refuses to print. Donald Trump has not been charged with insurrection, he has not been convicted of insurrection, and the Senate explicitly acquitted him of these charges during the second impeachment trial. Yet, we have elected officials like Crockett acting as judge, jury, and executioner, deciding on their own that they can label a political rival a traitor and strip him of his rights without due process. This is the very definition of lawfare, a term you are going to hear me use a lot because it is the warfare of the 21st century. It is the strategy of using the court system, the Department of Justice, and obscure legal theories to achieve what they cannot achieve at the ballot box, which is the destruction of Donald Trump and the movement he represents. When Crockett says that failing to hold Trump accountable sets a dangerous precedent, she is engaging in a classic projection tactic, accusing the other side of exactly what she is doing. The true dangerous precedent is allowing a partisan coalition to declare that their main opponent is ineligible to run based on their own subjective interpretation of events, bypassing the judicial standard of innocent until proven guilty that is the bedrock of our civilization. Think about the implications of what she is proposing, because if they can do this to a billionaire former president with the best lawyers in the world, imagine what they can do to you. If they can declare that a speech calling for people to peacefully and patriotically make their voices heard is actually an act of insurrection, then the First Amendment is effectively dead for anyone who disagrees with the state. Crockett frames this as a defense of the Constitution, but you cannot save the Constitution by shredding it. You cannot claim to be the guardians of the Republic while you are actively trying to remove the name of the person who received 74 million votes from the ballot. The timing of this push is also incredibly suspicious, and you don't need to be a conspiracy theorist to see the pattern here. Every time the polling data comes out showing Trump crushing Biden in a head-to-head matchup, or showing Trump making historic gains among African American and Hispanic voters, suddenly there is a new legal theory, a new indictment, or a new call for disqualification. It is not a coincidence, it is a coordinated panic response from an establishment that realizes their grip on power is slipping away. They look at the grocery prices, the gas prices, the chaos at the southern border, and the fires burning across the globe, and they know they have no defense for their record. So, instead of fixing the border or lowering inflation, they send people like Jasmine Crockett out to push the narrative that Trump is an existential threat who must be stopped at all costs, even if it means breaking the law to do it. She talks about the integrity of the office, but where was this concern for integrity when we had riots burning down American cities in the summer of 2020? Where was the talk of insurrection when federal courthouses were being attacked night after night by radical leftists? The silence from her side of the aisle on actual political violence is deafening, yet they want to criminalize a dispute over an election result. We have to understand that this 14th Amendment argument is their break glass in case of emergency option, the final desperate Hail Mary pass because the indictments aren't working the way they hoped. They thought that by piling on charges in New York, Georgia, and D.C., they would humiliate Trump and cause his support to collapse, but the American people are smarter than they give them credit for. The people saw through the charade, they recognized the two-tiered system of justice, and Trump's poll numbers actually went up. This infuriated the left, and now they are pivoting to this disqualification theory because it doesn't require a jury, it just requires a few activist judges and some loud politicians to push it through. Crockett claims that allowing Trump to run would be a failure of the rule of law, but let's look at the actual text of the Constitution she claims to love so much. The Constitution sets very specific requirements for the presidency. You have to be 35 years old, a natural-born citizen, and a resident for 14 years. It does not say unless Jasmine Crockett doesn't like you, and it certainly doesn't say unless the media decides you are a threat. By trying to add new qualifications through judicial fiat, they are effectively rewriting the social contract that holds this country together. This is why the term disenfranchisement is so important here, because that is exactly what they are aiming for. They are telling the voters in Iowa, in New Hampshire, in South Carolina, and across the Super Tuesday states that their opinion is irrelevant. They are saying, we will decide who you are allowed to vote for, and we will filter out anyone who threatens our power structure. It is elitism in its purest, most toxic form, masquerading as a defense of democracy. And let's not forget the sheer hypocrisy of the party that constantly lectures us about the sanctity of norms while they shatter every single norm in the book. For over 200 years, we have had a tradition in this country that we settle our differences at the ballot box, that the transfer of power relies on the people's voice, not on legal technicalities found in the footnotes of post-Civil War history. By dragging the courts into the center of the presidential election, they are politicizing the judiciary in a way that will cause permanent damage to the Supreme Court and the federal bench. They are forcing judges to become political actors, which is exactly what the Founding Fathers warned us against. Crockett's rhetoric about Trump's dictatorial behavior is also a classic case of gaslighting, aimed at making you question your own reality. Who is actually acting like a dictator here? Is it the man campaigning across the country, asking for your vote, and holding rallies to listen to the people? Or is it the faction that is using the power of the state to arrest their opponent, gag him from speaking, and now, remove him from the ballot entirely? Dictators don't usually rely on getting the most votes, and they rely on eliminating the competition so that votes don't matter, and that is precisely the playbook the Democrats are running. The irony is thick enough to cut with a knife when she talks about protecting the future of the United States. The future they are building is one where political opposition is criminalized, where the Department of Justice is the enforcement arm of the ruling party, and where the Constitution is just a piece of paper that can be twisted to mean whatever the current regime needs it to mean. If they succeed in using the 14th Amendment to ban Trump, the precedent it sets will weaponize every future election. Red states could start disqualifying Democrats for their support of open borders, arguing it violates the guarantee of protection against invasion. Blue states will disqualify Republicans for questioning climate change. It leads to the balkanization of America, where the president is decided not by who wins the most votes, but by which party controls the secretaries of state and the state supreme courts. This is the abyss that Jasmine Crockett is cheerfully leading us toward, all while smiling for the cameras and claiming the moral high ground. She represents a new breed of politician who believes that the ends justify the means, that because they have convinced themselves that Trump is evil, any action taken against him is virtuous, even if it destroys the very system they claim to be saving. They have abandoned the concept of a neutral playing field because they are terrified that on a level field, they will lose. We need to talk about the insurrection narrative itself, because it is the foundation of her entire house of cards. The events of January 6th were a riot, they were chaotic, and for those who broke the law, there have been consequences. But to elevate a few hours of chaos to the level of the Civil War, where hundreds of thousands of men died and the nation was literally torn in half, is an insult to history and a gross exaggeration designed for political utility. There was no army, there were no weapons of war, there was no command structure attempting to seize the government. To use a clause written to stop Confederate generals from taking office and apply it to a dispute over election integrity is intellectual dishonesty of the highest order. Furthermore, the legal scholars, even the liberal ones who hate Trump, are divided on this because they know it is a bridge too far. They know that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment is not self-executing, meaning Congress has to pass legislation to enforce it, which they haven't done for this context. Crockett ignores all this nuance, ignores the legal hurdles, and speaks with the certainty of a zealot because her target audience isn't legal scholars, it's the MSNBC base that wants red meat. She is feeding the beast, keeping the outrage machine fueled so that their voters don't stop to ask why their grocery bill has doubled. It is crucial to recognize that this is not just about Donald Trump the man, it is about the movement he awakened. The establishment hates him, yes, but they hate you more. They hate that you stopped listening to their approved experts. They hate that you stopped believing their biased polls. They hate that you want your country back. Trump is just the obstacle standing in their way, the vessel for your frustration, and that is why they are trying to sink him. When Crockett demands impeachment procedures and disqualification, she is really saying that she wants to disqualify the concerns of the working class, the rural communities, and the forgotten men and women of America. The ruling she refers to is often a localized decision or a preliminary finding that is immediately stayed pending appeal, yet she presents it as the final word of God. This is how the game is played: seize on a small, temporary victory in a friendly jurisdiction, amplify it through the megaphone of the media, and try to create a sense of inevitability that Trump is finished. But we know better. We know that these cases are flimsy, that they fall apart under scrutiny, and that the Supreme Court will likely have to step in and put an end to this madness. But until then, they will milk every second of airtime they can get. Let's look at the phrase accountability that she uses so freely. Where is the accountability for the lies about Russian collusion that tore this country apart for 3 years? We now know, unequivocally, that it was a hoax paid for by the Clinton campaign and pushed by the FBI, yet not a single person involved has faced the kind of wrath they are directing at Trump. Where is the accountability for the laptop that was called Russian disinformation right before the 2020 election, a lie that 51 intelligence officials signed their names to? That was real election interference. That changed votes. But Crockett isn't holding hearings on that. No, she is focused entirely on the one man who threatens the status quo. This obsession with Trump is a sickness that has infected the entire Democratic Party. They cannot govern, they cannot legislate effectively, so they litigate. They have turned the Department of Justice into their own private law firm. And when a member of Congress like Crockett stands up and demands that we bypass the voters to save democracy, she is revealing the authoritarian streak that runs deep in the modern left. They believe they own the democracy. They believe it belongs to them, and that you are just guests who should be grateful for whatever scraps of freedom they allow you to keep. We must also consider the international message this sends. We used to be the gold standard for free and fair elections. We used to lecture other countries about not jailing political opponents or banning them from running. Now, the whole world is watching as the United States descends into the kind of legal warfare we used to criticize in third world dictatorships. When we try to remove the leading opposition candidate from the ballot, we lose all moral authority on the global stage. Our enemies in China and Russia are laughing at us, using this as propaganda to show their own people that American democracy is a sham. Jasmine Crockett and her allies are doing the work of our adversaries for them, eroding faith in our system from the inside out. The damage they are doing to the social fabric of this nation is incalculable, and you have to wonder if that isn't the point. By constantly pushing the narrative that a massive segment of the population supports a traitor, Jasmine Crockett and her colleagues are dehumanizing tens of millions of Americans. They are setting the stage for a society where your political affiliation determines your employment, your ability to bank, and your ability to travel. We saw the dry run of this during the pandemic with the mandates, and now they are applying that same logic of exclusion to the political arena. If they can ban the candidate, the next logical step is to punish the voter, to declare that supporting the insurrectionist is itself an act of sedition. Let's get back to the legal nitty-gritty that they gloss over, because the devil is always in the details. The 14th Amendment, Section 3, lists specific positions that are subject to disqualification as senators, representatives, electors, and officers of the United States. It notably does not explicitly list the president or the vice president, and there is a massive historical and legal debate over whether the president is technically an officer of the United States in the constitutional sense or if he is a unique entity holding the executive power. When the amendment was drafted, there was a proposal to explicitly include the president, and it was rejected, suggesting the omission was intentional. Crockett breezes past this constitutional reality because facts are inconvenient obstacles on her road to power. Moreover, Section 3 includes a remedy: a Congress can remove this disability with a two-thirds vote. This implies that the enforcement mechanism belongs to Congress, not to a random judge in Colorado or a Secretary of State in Maine. By trying to execute this disqualification state by state, they are creating a patchwork nightmare where the President of the United States is decided by geography and local partisan biases rather than the national popular will. Imagine a map where red states strip Biden from the ballot for his failure to enforce immigration laws, which arguably aids an invasion, and blue states strip Trump for January 6. The United States would cease to exist as a unified republic and would dissolve into a collection of warring tribes, which is exactly the kind of chaos our enemies are praying for. Crockett's plea to protect the rule of law is the ultimate projection because the rule of law requires consistency, and there is zero consistency here. When Democrats challenged the electoral votes in 2000, 2004, and 2016, was that insurrection? When they occupied the Wisconsin state capitol, or when they stormed the Senate confirmation hearings for Brett Kavanaugh, screaming and banging on the doors, was that an attempt to obstruct an official proceeding? Of course not, because when they do it, it's called activism and civil disobedience. But when conservatives gather to question the irregularities of an election that had last-minute rule changes and unverified ballots, it suddenly becomes a crime against the state worthy of the political death penalty. We also need to address the violent rhetoric accusation that Crockett throws around. She claims Trump's words incited violence, yet she belongs to a party whose leaders have explicitly called for supporters to get in the faces of Republicans, to create crowds, and to make sure their opponents have no peace. The standard for incitement in American law, established in Brandenburg v. Ohio, is extremely high. You have to explicitly direct imminent lawless action. Trump's words, "fight like hell," are standard political metaphors used by every politician in history, including Joe Biden, who once said he'd like to take Trump behind the gym. If we start criminalizing political hyperbole, every single member of Congress, including Jasmine Crockett, would be in prison. The push to use the 14th Amendment is also a tacit admission that the indictments, the so-called LAWFARE, are failing to achieve their primary objective, which was to drain Trump's resources and break his spirit. They see him sitting in courtrooms, defiant, turning mugshots into fundraising records, and it terrifies them. They realize that they have inadvertently turned him into a martyr, a symbol of resistance against an overreaching government. So, the disqualification strategy is the nuclear option. It is an attempt to flip the board over because they are losing the chess match. They would rather burn the village to save it than risk a Trump victory that would expose the corruption of the deep state. And make no mistake, the corruption is what this is really about. Trump is a threat not because he is a dictator, but because he is a disruptor. He threatens the gravy train of the military-industrial complex, the lobbyists, the pharmaceutical giants, and the globalist organizations that Jasmine Crockett blindly supports. When she talks about protecting our values, she means protecting their revenue streams and their control. A second Trump term represents a dismantling of the administrative state, the unelected bureaucrats who actually run Washington, and that is why the system is fighting back with every antibody it possesses. The 14th Amendment is just the latest weapon in an arsenal that has included the Steele dossier, the Mueller probe, and 2 sham impeachments. Think about the psychology of a politician like Crockett. She comes from a district that is deeply blue, where she never faces a real general election challenge, only a primary. Her incentive structure is built entirely on being the loudest, most radical voice in the room to please the donor class and the activist base. She doesn't have to worry about what a swing voter in Ohio thinks. This disconnect explains why she pushes theories that sound insane to the average American. She lives in an echo chamber where Trump is Voldemort and she is a member of the Order of the Phoenix. It's political cosplay, but with dangerous real-world consequences for the stability of our nation. The media plays the role of the amplifier in this dangerous game. They take Crockett's fringe legal theories and present them as serious constitutional scholarship. You'll see headlines like "Legal experts say Trump is disqualified," but they rarely tell you those experts are the same partisan hacks who told you the Hunter Biden laptop was fake. They create a feedback loop of hysteria. A politician makes a radical claim, the media treats it as a legitimate debate, and then the politician cites the media reports as proof that people are talking about this. It is a manufactured consensus designed to manufacture consent for the removal of the leading candidate. What they are underestimating, however, is the resolve of the American people. The more they push these Soviet-style tactics, the more they awaken the sleeping giant. People who were on the fence about Trump are looking at this and saying, "I might not like his tweets, but I cannot support a system that tries to rig the election before a single vote is cast." The unfairness of it is visceral. Americans love an underdog, and by piling the entire weight of the federal government and the court system on one man, they are making him the ultimate underdog. Jasmine Crockett thinks she is burying Trump, but she is actually planting seeds of support that will blossom in November. Furthermore, look at the condescension inherent in her position. She is essentially saying that you, the voter, are too stupid or too dangerous to be trusted with your own ballot. She believes that if you are allowed to see Trump's name on the list, you might make the wrong choice, so she has to make the choice for you. It is the height of elitist arrogance. They view the Constitution not as a constraint on their power, but as a tool to restrain the will of the people. They have inverted the entire purpose of our founding documents. If we allow this precedent to stand, we are opening Pandora's box. Imagine a future where a Republican administration decides that a Democrat candidate who supported the Black Lives Matter riots, which caused billions in damage and resulted in dozens of deaths, is disqualified under the same insurrection clause. Imagine if they decide that a Democrat who advocates for open borders is giving aid and comfort to the enemies of the United States, another condition of the 14th Amendment. The definitions will stretch and stretch until there is no democracy left, only an unending cycle of legal purges where the party in power eliminates the opposition. That is the world Jasmine Crockett is inviting us into. It is also worth noting the sheer desperation in their timing. We are in the middle of a primary season. Voters are already going to the polls. To attempt to change the rules of the game while the game is being played is the hallmark of a rigged system. If they truly believe Trump was ineligible, why didn't they push this in 2021? Why wait until he is dominating the polls? The answer is obvious, they hoped he would fade away. They hoped DeSantis or someone else would take him out. But now that it is clear Trump is the presumptive nominee, they are hitting the panic button. This isn't about principle, it's about political survival. Crockett's reference to protecting the Constitution against domestic enemies is chilling when you realize she considers you the domestic enemy. To the modern left, anyone who questions the narrative on climate change, gender ideology, or the integrity of the 2020 election is an enemy of the state. They have expanded the definition of threat to include half the country. When they talk about purging the government, they aren't just talking about Trump, they are talking about purging the ideology of America first. They want a compliant populace, not a citizenry that thinks for itself. The 14th Amendment argument essentially asks us to ignore the history of the Civil War and repurpose it for modern political warfare. The Confederates issued their own currency, raised their own armies, and declared their own country. Donald Trump told people to go home peacefully. Equating the two is a slap in the face to the memory of those who died to preserve the Union. It cheapens the gravity of the Civil War to score cheap political points on a cable news segment. But for people like Crockett, history is just another resource to be mined and twisted for present-day advantage. We must also ask, what happens if they succeed? Let's play out the scenario where the Supreme Court, in a moment of weakness, allows states to remove Trump. Do they think the 74 million people who voted for him will just shrug and say, "Oh well, guess I'll vote for Nikki Haley or stay home"? No. It will confirm every conspiracy theory, every suspicion, and every fear that the system is rigged. It will lead to a crisis of legitimacy that this country hasn't seen since 1860. The Democrats are playing with fire in a room full of gasoline, and they are too blinded by their hatred of one man to see the explosion they are about to ignite. In the end, this isn't about the law. If it were about the law, Hillary Clinton would be in jail for destroying evidence under subpoena. If it were about the law, the Biden family's shell companies would be under RICO indictments. This is about power, raw, naked power. Jasmine Crockett is a foot soldier in a war to ensure that the permanent political class remains permanent. They are trying to criminalize the only effective opposition they have ever faced. And that is why we cannot just watch this happen, and we have to expose it for the fraud that it is. This brings us to the ultimate backstop of our constitutional republic, the firewall that the left is desperately trying to breach, the Supreme Court of the United States. Jasmine Crockett knows, just as her handlers know, that this 14th Amendment strategy is destined to land on the steps of the Supreme Court. And this is where the strategy shifts from legal argumentation to straight-up mafia-style intimidation. Have you noticed the sudden, coordinated attacks on the conservative justices lately? The relentless smear campaigns against Justice Clarence Thomas and Justice Samuel Alito? The constant articles in the legacy media questioning their ethics, their finances, and their impartiality? This is not a coincidence, it is preparation. They are working the refs on a massive scale. They are trying to create an atmosphere where if the Supreme Court rules in favor of Trump, which any honest reading of the Constitution says they must, the Democrats can scream that the court is illegitimate, corrupt, and compromised. They are pre-delegitimizing the only institution left that stands between them and total control. Crockett's rhetoric about saving democracy is actually a veiled threat, rule our way, or we will burn down the credibility of the judicial branch. They are holding the court hostage, essentially daring the justices to follow the law rather than the mob. If the Supreme Court strikes down these attempts to remove Trump from the ballot, listen closely to what Crockett and her allies will say next. They won't say, "We respect the decision of the highest court." No, they will pivot immediately to calls for court packing. They will demand that we expand the number of justices to 13 or 15 so they can fill the bench with radical leftist activists who will rubber stamp their agenda. This is the endgame. The attack on Trump is the battering ram they are using to break the judiciary. They want a court system that functions like the one in the Soviet Union, a system where the verdict is decided by the party before the trial even begins. We must also look at the global context, because what Jasmine Crockett is pushing for isn't unique to America. It is part of a globalist playbook we are seeing rolled out in country after country. Look at Brazil, where the establishment judiciary banned former President Jair Bolsonaro from running for office, accusing him of, you guessed it, attacking the democratic system. Look at the lawfare used against opposition leaders in Europe. The globalist elite, the Davos crowd, the people who want you eating bugs and owning nothing, have realized that they cannot control populist movements through traditional elections. So, they have standardized the tactic, criminalize the leader, ban the party, censor the supporters. Crockett is simply reading the American version of a script that has already been acted out in Brasilia and Brussels. This is why they are so terrified of America First. It's not just a slogan, it's a rejection of their entire worldview. They believe in a post-national world where borders are suggestions and sovereignty is a relic of the past. Trump represents the nation-state. He represents the idea that the American government exists to serve American citizens, not international treaties or multinational corporations. When Crockett talks about Trump being disqualified, she means he is disqualified from their club. He refuses to play by the rules of the swamp, and for that, he must be exiled. But let's talk about the uniparty aspect of this, because it would be dishonest to say this is only a Democrat problem. There are plenty of Republicans, the rhinos, Republicans in name only, the never-Trumpers, who are secretly cheering Jasmine Crockett on. They won't say it publicly because they know their voters would revolt, but behind closed doors, in the cocktail parties of Georgetown, they are hoping the Democrats succeed. They want Trump gone so they can go back to the good old days where Republicans were the controlled opposition, the polite losers who would cut taxes for corporations but let the culture rot. They hate Trump because he exposed their fecklessness. He showed that you can actually fight back, and that makes them look weak by comparison. These establishment Republicans are the ones who legitimized the January 6th narrative in the first place. They are the ones who sat on the committee, who gave bipartisan cover to the witch hunt. When you hear Crockett quote bipartisan findings, she is quoting the betrayal of people like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. This is a reminder that the battle we are fighting is not just red versus blue, it is the people versus the establishment. The establishment has two wings, but it's the same bird, and right now, that bird is trying to claw Donald Trump's eyes out. Let's go deeper into the insurrection lie, because it is the linchpin of Crockett's entire argument. If there was an insurrection, why was no one charged with insurrection? The Department of Justice has charged over 1,000 people related to January 6th. They have thrown the book at grandmas for parading without a permit. They have used obstruction charges, trespassing charges, assault charges. But they haven't charged Trump or the vast majority of rioters with actual insurrection under 18 U.S. Code Section 2383. Why? Because they know they can't prove it in a court of law. The evidence isn't there. So instead, they use the word insurrection colloquially, politically, and emotionally on television, hoping that if they say it enough times, it becomes truth. It is a propaganda technique known as the big lie, projected onto their opponents. Crockett is relying on a Colorado lower court judge's opinion, a judge appointed by a Democrat governor, who decided, without a jury, that Trump engaged in insurrection while simultaneously ruling that the 14th Amendment didn't apply to the president. It was a convoluted, contradictory mess of a ruling, but Crockett cherry-picks the parts she likes. She ignores the fact that the Senate already tried Trump for this exact charge and acquitted him. In our system, that is supposed to be the end of it. Double jeopardy is a real concept. You cannot keep trying a man until you get the result you want. But again, to the radical left, the Constitution is just an obstacle course to be navigated, not a sacred covenant. And what about the disenfranchisement of the minority voters that the Democrats claim to own? Trump is polling at historic highs with Black and Hispanic men. These voters are waking up to the fact that the Democrat policies of high taxes, open borders, and soft-on-crime policing are destroying their communities. They are realizing that under Trump, they had jobs, they had rising wages, and they had safe neighborhoods. By trying to remove Trump from the ballot, Jasmine Crockett is telling these Black and Hispanic voters that they are not allowed to leave the Democrat plantation. She is saying, "We own your vote, and if you try to give it to that man, we will take the option away." It is paternalistic, it is insulting, and frankly, it is racist in its assumption that these voters cannot think for themselves. The economic angle of this cannot be ignored either. The donor class, the Wall Street hedge funds, the Silicon Valley tech giants, are pouring money into these legal efforts. Why? Because Trump threatens their bottom line. He wants to put tariffs on China, where they make their cheap goods. He wants to break up the tech monopolies that censor free speech. He wants to stop the endless wars that the military-industrial complex profits from. Follow the money behind the lawsuits, behind the NGOs filing these briefs, and you will find the same network of billionaires who fund the Democrats' super PACs. Jasmine Crockett is the public face, the grassroots voice, but the hand moving the mouth is holding a checkbook signed by the global elite. We need to ask ourselves, what is the dangerous precedent really? Crockett says allowing Trump to run is the danger. I say the danger is creating a system where a partisan Secretary of State in a swing state can unilaterally decide to disqualify the opposition candidate. Imagine a scenario where a Republican Secretary of State in Georgia decides Biden is disqualified for corruption involving China and Ukraine. Imagine a Secretary of State in Texas disqualifying Kamala Harris for failing to secure the border. The election would become a farce, a legal battle of attrition where the winner is the last lawyer standing. That is the end of the republic. That is the path to civil war. And that is the path Crockett is sprinting down with a torch in her hand. They are banking on Trump fatigue. They hope that the average American will look at all this drama, all these lawsuits, all this noise, and just say, I can't take it anymore, I just want it to stop. They want to exhaust you into submission. They want you to believe that the chaos is Trump's fault, not the fault of the people creating the chaos to stop him. It is the logic of the abuser, look what you made me do. They are creating the constitutional crisis and then blaming Trump for existing. But we have to have the stamina to see through it. We have to realize that the noise is the sound of the swamp draining, and the screeching is the sound of the creatures losing their habitat. Consider the absolute irony of Crockett using the 14th Amendment, an amendment passed to guarantee equal protection under the law for former slaves, to strip the rights of voters in 2024. The 14th Amendment was about expanding freedom, expanding citizenship, bringing people into the fold of the American experiment. She is weaponizing it to contract freedom, to exclude people, to narrow the electorate. It is a perversion of history. The Reconstruction era was about healing the nation and ensuring loyalty to the Union. This new interpretation is about dividing the nation and ensuring loyalty to the Democrat Party. Let's talk about the threat to democracy framing again. Democracy implies choice. It implies that the people are sovereign. If you remove the leading candidate, you are not protecting democracy, you are protecting the oligarchy. You are protecting the administrative state from the will of the people. They are terrified that if Trump gets back in, he will actually fire the bureaucrats who have been undermining our country for decades. He will strip their security clearances. He will expose the files. That is why they are panicking. It's self-preservation. Jasmine Crockett is just one layer of the defense mechanism of a corrupt system fighting for its life. The arrogance of these people is their Achilles heel. They truly believe that they are the adults in the room and that you are the unruly children. They think they can simply explain away your vote with legal jargon. But they have forgotten that the power in this country ultimately rests with we the people. Every time they indict him, his numbers go up. Every time they try to gag him, his message spreads further. Every time they try to kick him off the ballot, they prove his point that the system is rigged. They are caught in a trap of their own making. If they stop, he wins. If they continue, they turn him into a legend. Look at the hypocrisy regarding norms. They accuse Trump of shattering norms because he sent mean tweets. Meanwhile, they are shattering the norm of peaceful political competition. They are shattering the norm of judicial neutrality. They are shattering the norm of innocent until proven guilty. They have become everything they claim to hate. They are the authoritarians. They are the fascists projecting their own shadow onto the MAGA movement. When Crockett speaks with that righteous indignation, remember that it is a performance. It is theater designed to mask the cold, hard reality of a power grab. And what about the sheer waste of resources? While Crockett and her colleagues are spending their time and our tax dollars on these frivolous lawsuits and hearings, the country is falling apart. Our infrastructure is crumbling, our schools are failing, our veterans are homeless, and fentanyl is killing a generation of young Americans. But instead of solving these problems, they are obsessed with one man. They are obsessed with January 6th, a day that happened years ago, while ignoring the suffering happening right now, today, on the streets of their own districts. It is a dereliction of duty. they are failing their constituents to pursue a vendetta. We must also be wary of the compromise they might offer. They might say, okay, we won't ban him, but we need a special counsel to monitor his campaign, or some other restrictive measure. Do not fall for it. Any restriction on a candidate that does not apply to all candidates is election interference. We demand a clean election. We demand that the American people get to see the debates, hear the arguments, and make up their own minds. We don't need Jasmine Crockett to be our chaperone. We don't need the media to be our filter. We are free citizens of a free republic, and we demand the right to choose our president without the interference of unelected judges or partisan politicians. This 14th Amendment push is also a test. It is a test of the Republican Party's spine. Will the leadership in the House and Senate stand up and say enough? Will they threaten to defund the Department of Justice if this lawfare continues? Will they impeach the officials who are abusing their power? Or will they issue a strongly worded press release and go back to fundraising? We are watching. The base is watching. And we are taking names. The time for polite disagreement is over. When the other side is trying to arrest your leader and ban your party, you are in a cold civil war, whether you want to admit it or not. Representative Crockett closes her arguments by appealing to history. She says history will judge those who stand with Trump. Well, I have news for her. History is written by the victors, but truth is eternal. The truth is that the MAGA movement is the most diverse, most energetic, and most patriotic political coalition in modern American history. It is a movement of builders, growers, truckers, and moms and dads who just want their country to be sane again. History will look back on this era and see the Democrats as the party that panicked. The party that abandoned its principles. The party that tried to burn down the village to rule over the ashes. We are standing at a precipice. The next few months will determine if we are a republic of laws or a republic of men. If the Supreme Court holds the line, we survive to fight another day at the ballot box. If they fold, if they succumb to the pressure from the left, then we are in uncharted territory. But one thing is certain, the American spirit is not easily crushed. They can ban a name from a piece of paper, but they cannot ban the idea of freedom from the hearts of the people. They can silence a speaker, but they cannot silence the truth. So, what is the call to action here? What do we, the people who actually love this country and understand what is at stake, do in the face of this unprecedented assault on our rights? First and foremost, we do not despair. That is what they want. They want you to look at the headlines, look at the indictments, look at Jasmine Crockett's smug confidence, and feel hopeless. They want you to think it's over. But it is not over. It is just beginning. The fact that they are resorting to these extreme measures proves that they are scared. They know their grip is weak. We must become the media. We can no longer rely on the networks that invite people like Crockett on to spew their propaganda without pushback. We have to share the truth ourselves. Share clips like this. Talk to your neighbors. Explain to them that this isn't about whether they like Donald Trump personally, it's about whether they want to live in a country where the ruling party picks the opposition. Frame it that way. Ask them, do you trust the government to tell you who you can vote for? Most Americans, regardless of party, will say no. That is our common ground. That is how we win the argument. We also need to flood the phone lines of our representatives. Not just the Democrats, they are a lost cause, but the Republicans. Call your state legislators, your governors, your secretaries of state. Tell them that if they allow this lawfare to proceed in your state, there will be political consequences. Demand that they pass legislation reaffirming that access to the ballot is a fundamental right that cannot be stripped away without a criminal conviction and due process. We need to build a fortress of state laws that protect the integrity of the election from these federal overreaches. And finally, we must prepare to vote like we have never voted before. If they manage to keep him on the ballot, which I believe they will, because the Supreme Court knows the alternative is chaos, then we need to deliver a mandate so overwhelming that it cannot be questioned, challenged, or litigated away. We need a landslide. A victory too big to rig. We need to send a message to Jasmine Crockett, to the DOJ, to the media, and to the world that America is not a banana republic, and we will not be ruled by tyrants in suits. The story Jasmine Crockett is telling is a fairy tale of good versus evil, where she is the knight and Trump is the dragon. But we know the real story. The real story is about a corrupt establishment terrified of a populace that has stopped believing their lies. It's about a political class that has failed for decades trying to outlaw the one man who succeeded. They have the courts, they have the media, they have the money. But we have the people. And in America, the people are supposed to be the ones in charge. Let's make sure they remember that in November. This is a battle for the soul of the nation. They have fired the first shot with this 14th Amendment nonsense. They have shown their hand. They are willing to destroy the Constitution to save their power. Now it's our turn to show them that the Constitution is not a suicide pact, and it is not a weapon for partisan revenge. It is the shield of the free, and we will hold it high. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and never, ever give up the fight for our great republic.